to the 78th UNGA's theme of rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity. This is an occasion to take stock of our achievements and challenges, even while sharing our aspirations and goals. And indeed, in regard to both, there is much that India has to share. Mr. President, the world is witnessing an exceptional period of turmoil. As it is, structural inequities and uneven development have imposed burdens on the global south. But stresses have been aggravated by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the repercussions of ongoing conflicts, tensions, and disputes. As a result, socio-economic gains of recent years have been rolled back, resources for sustainable development are severely challenged, and many countries really struggle to make ends meet. Navigating the future appears even more daunting today. At this juncture, it was with a sense of exceptional responsibility that India took up the presidency of the G20. Our vision of one Earth, one family, one future sought to focus on the key concerns of the many, not just the narrow interests of a few. In the words of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, it was to bridge divides, dismantle barriers, and sow seeds of collaboration that nourish a world where unity prevails over discord and where shared destiny eclipses isolation. The New Delhi G20 Leaders' Declaration articulates our collective ability to do so. Excellencies, friends, at a time when East-West polarization is so sharp and the North-South divide so deep, the New Delhi Summit also affirms that diplomacy and dialogue are the only effective solutions. The international order is diverse, and we must cater for divergences, if not differences. The days when a few nations set the agenda and expected others to fall in line are over. As the United Nations itself symbolizes, finding common ground is an imperative. To listen to others and to respect their viewpoints, this is not weakness, it is the basics of cooperation. Only then can collective efforts on global issues be successful. Recognizing that growth and development must focus on the most vulnerable, we began the G20 presidency by convening the Voice of the Global South Summit. This enabled us to hear directly from 125 nations and place their concerns on the G20 agenda. As a consequence, issues which deserve global attention got a fair hearing. More than that, the deliberations produce outcomes that have great significance for the international community. Mr. President, it was also noteworthy that at India's initiative, the African Union was admitted as a permanent member of the G20. By doing so, we gave voice to an entire continent which has long been its due. This significant step in reform should inspire the United Nations, a much older organization, to also make the Security Council contemporary. Broad representation is, after all, a prerequisite for both effectiveness and credibility. The outcomes of the New Delhi G20 summit will surely resonate for years ahead. Among them is an action plan for sustainable development goals, a crucial need of the day. Equally important are the high principles of lifestyle for environment, and the Green Development Pact as they shape our approach to our planet's future. The transformative role of digital public infrastructure has also finally been recognized, as the salience of women-led development in building an inclusive and progressive society. The reform of international financial institutions has been given due weight, as has the resolution of debt vulnerabilities. Friends, the New Delhi G20 outcomes are expressed both as larger policies and as specific initiatives. They could be about building cities for tomorrow, or fighting corruption, eliminating hunger, or delivering quality education, ending plastic pollution, or preserving the ocean-based economy, or for that matter, enhancing food security, or even mapping global skills. Some address long-standing issues like gender divide and climate action. Others focus on new concerns such as responsible harnessing of artificial intelligence. All in all, we have placed for the world's consideration a set of actionable propositions, constructive solutions, and new directions. Even as we encourage collective endeavors, India also seeks to promote cooperation with diverse partners. From the era of non-alignment, we have now evolved to that of Vishwa Mitra, a friend to the world. This is reflected in our ability and willingness to engage with a broad range of nations and, where necessary, harmonize interests. It is visible in the rapid growth of the Quad, a mechanism today so relevant to the Indo-Pacific. It is equally apparent in the expansion of the BRICS grouping of independent-minded nations, or in fact the emergence of the I2U2 combination. Recently, we hosted the creation of the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC. The forging of the Global Biofuels Alliance was another notable development. This willingness to work in an open-minded manner on specific domains is now a defining characteristic of the emerging multipolar order. Mr. President, all nations pursue their national interests. We, in India, have never seen that as being in contradiction with global good. When we aspire to be a leading power, this is not for self-aggrandizement, but to take on greater responsibility and make more contributions. The goals we have set for ourselves will make us different from all those whose rise preceded ours. India demonstrated this during the COVID through the Vaccine Maitri initiative. Our endeavors, like the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster-Resilient Infrastructure, have gathered wide support. Our espousing of the International Year of Millets is enhancing global food security today. We have built development partnerships with 78 nations across geographies. And we have also been first responder in disaster emergency situations. The people of Turkey saw that in February, as did those in Syria. Our commitment is understandably even greater closer home. When Sri Lanka experienced a severe economic crisis, it was India that first stepped forward. But even in distant regions, partners such as the Pacific Islands have appreciated our contributions to meet their needs in health, in technology, and in climate action. Mr. President, the most populous nation and the fifth largest economy in the world knows that its progress makes a real difference to the world. Especially so when so many nations identify with us for reasons of history, of geography, and of culture. They follow our experiences closely and evaluate our solutions for their larger relevance. Last week, the United Nations assessed progress towards achieving SDGs. The mood here reflected the struggle to overcome challenges, especially those of resource paucity. It is therefore vital at this midway that we expand our capacities and regain our confidence. As the largest contributor to meeting SDG targets, India's achievements should give heart to others on this journey. After all, the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index records that we have halved the global MPI value in the last 15 years, lifting 415 million people out of poverty. That progress has now moved on to a higher level with ambitious socio-economic initiatives covering financial inclusion, food and nutrition, health and water supply, as well as energy and housing. We are seeking to demonstrate that social welfare need not be the sole prerogative of the developed world. Excellencies, programs underway in India highlight the transformational role of digital delivery of public goods. It has facilitated scaling up, it has enhanced efficiency, and it has combated corruption. The national objective of leaving no one behind is forging ahead in so many dimensions. Moreover, the democratization of technology has opened mindsets, instilled confidence, and inspired innovations. Excellencies, in our deliberations, we often advocate the promotion of a rules-based order. From time to time, respect for the UN Charter is also invoked. But for all the talk, it is still a few nations who shape the agenda and seek to define the norms. This cannot go on indefinitely, nor will it go unchallenged. A fair, equitable, and democratic order will surely emerge once we all put our minds to it. And for a start, that means ensuring that rule makers do not subjugate rule takers. After all, rules will work only when they apply equally to all. Mr. President, we must never again allow an injustice like vaccine apartheid to recur. Climate action, too, cannot continue to witness an evasion of historical responsibilities. The power of markets should not be utilized to steer food and energy from the needy to the wealthy. Nor must we countenance that political convenience determines responses to terrorism, extremism, and violence. Similarly, respect for territorial integrity and non-interference in internal affairs cannot be exercises in cherry-picking. When reality departs from the rhetoric, we must have the courage to call it out. Without genuine solidarity, there can never be real trust. This is very much the sentiment of the Global South. Next year, the United Nations will be hosting the Summit of the Future. This should serve as a serious opportunity to drive change, champion fairness, and reform multilateralism, including the expansion of the Security Council memberships. We must address global challenges imbued with the conviction that we are one Earth and one family with one future. Excellencies, friends, India has entered the Amrit Kal, a quarter century where greater progress and transformation awaits us. We are confident that our talent and creativity, now so visibly unleashed, will power us forward. The world saw a glimpse of what is to come when our Chandrayaan-3 landed on the moon. Today, our message to the world is in digitally enabled governance and delivery, in the widening ambit of amenities and services, in rapidly growing infrastructure, and in our energetic startup culture. It is visible too in vibrant cultural expressions, such as in the arts, yoga, wellness, and lifestyle. Our latest assertion is in a path-breaking legislation to reserve 1/3 of the seats for women in our legislatures. Mr. President, I speak for a society where ancient traditions of democracy have struck deep modern roots. As a result, our thinking, approaches, and actions are now more grounded and authentic. As a civilizational polity that embraces modernity, we bring both tradition and technology equally confidently to the table. It is this fusion that today defines India, that is Bharat. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Minister of External Affairs of India. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Kamina Johnson-Smith, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade of Jamaica.
All right, viewers, so we just heard External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar addressing the United Nations General Assembly. And what we see right now is that he made a couple of points. He pushed for one family, one future at the UNGA, saying the world is witnessing an exception, a period of turmoil. At this juncture, it was a sense of exceptional responsibility. India took up the presidency of G20. Let's go straight to Abhishek Kapoor, our senior executive editor, who's joining us right now. Abhishek, what do you really make out of this opening remark at the UNGA? And we saw the G20 also find a mention there. In fact, he spoke about one earth, one family, one future, which was the exact theme of the G20, which India hosted. All right, viewers, so we'll just connect back to Abhishek Kapoor in just a moment. But we just saw that S. Jaishankar addressing the United Nations General Assembly. And let's go straight to Abhishek Kapoor, who's joining us back. Abhishek, glad you're back with us. Very important points being made, especially touching upon the G20 Leaders Summit, the outcomes. Especially India is seen as a solution provider, one that bridges the divides. Very important points being made, Abhishek.
Shivangi, we'll talk about External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar in his UNGA address mentioning about India being Vishwamitra and the G20 New Delhi Declaration and the unanimous or the consensus that was reached. But I think let me begin with the most important aspect of the 20 minutes that the External Affairs Minister spoke from the podium in the United Nations General Assembly, and it was the tough talk he did on some nations indulging in a very convenient, flexible interpretation of terrorism and acting accordingly. He said political convenience should not determine response to terrorism, among other things. He also said that territorial integrity has to be respected. He also said that without responsibility there cannot be real trust. And he in many ways held a mirror to the Western nations, including the United States and United Kingdom, one would say, but more specifically Canada, for the manner in which it has really conducted itself over the last fortnight. Also, it was, when it comes to the choice of words, clearly a message to China that the manner in which it has gone around compromising territorial integrity of its neighbors, including India in the case of Ladakh, and with its map with at least 14 other nations is something which is not in the interest of world peace, world progress. And the External Affairs Minister also almost read the Riot Act when he said that this is a multipolar world and the United Nations Security Council has to be made contemporary, and also that this is not going to go unchallenged if rule breakers become or get an opportunity to become or subjugate rule makers. I think this was some tough talk that External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar did, Shivangi, on the double standards that sometimes you see the West practicing. So, for example, when he said that we have been advocating about changes in lifestyle, and yet we have attempts made to transfer wealth from the poor and the needy to the wealthy and the greedy. I mean, he did not use the word greedy, but he said wealthy. And so I think in 20 minutes that was allotted. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar really packing a punch there and putting across India's view, calling India a Vishwaguru in the time of crisis. He also said that, and this was also, I think, a message to the United States when he said that from being non-aligned in an earlier era, India is now a friend of the world, a Vishwaguru. And then he concluded by, of course, bringing in the mention of, among other things, the Women's Reservation Bill and how it's going to change the destiny of India's women and their participation in politics. So I think a very wholesome speech there, holding a mirror to the West, holding a mirror to those who indulge in double standards and specifically on terrorism, find convenient definitions to lean on and practice double standards. I'm told Professor Madhav Nalapat, strategic affairs expert, joining us over the phone. Professor Nalapat, very good evening. And if you were listening to Dr. S. Jaishankar at the UNGA, your thoughts on how effectively he tackled the issue of the world trying to, hoodwink on issues like terrorism and definition of terrorism and climate change, etc., and specifically on the issue of some nations, including Canada, for example, trying to corner India on the issue of this Khalistani activism from their soil. Of course, he did not name, but indirectly there were a lot of messages.
To Minister Jaishankar's speech, and I must say it was a very forceful expression of the Indian point of view. You will recall that India was opposed to a unipolar world order right from the beginning, right from 1947, and it is opposed to an emerging attempt at unipolarity that is now appearing most visibly in the Indo-Pacific, but which has got its tentacles elsewhere as well. Minister Jaishankar was very, very clear that there cannot be cherry picking about terrorism. That you cannot, for example, as, let me say very frankly, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, is doing, basically cosseting terrorists and justifying terrorism in the largest democracy in the world, India. And at the same time, basically having a clear double standard where it comes to issues of human rights and rule of law. Justin Trudeau's definition of rule of law is rule of the outlaw. And these are the people he has surrounded himself with. So I think it is a very, very telling speech. And I'd like to point out that the points that he made reflect a worldview of a confident nation, a nation with a proud history and a proud people under a very strong leadership. And overall, I'd like to say that I think his words are going to be very carefully listened to, and his words are going to be very carefully looked at, because they do reflect. And one point he made very clearly, and that is that if the G20 can change and become more representative by the inclusion of the African Union, why can't the United Nations change and become more representative? Why do you have the same, 5 permanent members as at 1945 today, when times have changed so much, when the situation has changed so much? Why is the country, which is the biggest democracy in the world, the greatest population in the world, not a permanent member of the UNGA? I think a lot of what Minister Jaishankar said, directly and indirectly, was meant basically to point to the rampant double standard. We are seeing that now very clearly in the case of Trudeau, and we are seeing that in multiple other instances. These are being called out by the minister in his speech.
Madhav Nalapat, if I can just take one more question with you, true to the style of External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, he's essentially reached out on multiple occasions in the past too, signaling that you're looking at a multipolar crisis. And the answer that has essentially come in from Dr. S. Jaishankar has been time and again been that it can't be political convenience, be it for the West or now for that matter even countries like Pakistan. It can't really be the political convenience that essentially determines the response on crisis, on several crises, and particularly with regards to combating terrorism. How do you really look at that particular statement of Dr. S. Jaishankar? And do you believe that it talks about not just one nation, it talks about Canada, China and Pakistan?
Look, I'd like to say very clearly that Minister Jaishankar pointed to COVID and to the fact that India has been the most generous where vaccines are concerned. And may I point out that in Africa, for example, a great continent with a great population, it is India and Indian generic drugs that ensured that the AIDS epidemic was brought under control. He did not point that out, but it's true. And as for COVID, the greatest contribution made to vaccinating people against COVID was made by India. And it was made to the poorest countries of the world. There are, for example, you have Ukrainian grain, mostly going to a rich country. And you have Indian vaccine, mostly going to the poorest countries. And that is a huge difference, frankly. So I think he did right in pointing out. As for Pakistan, China, Canada, well, look, the reality is that a fair and just world is very essential for the survival of humanity. Human values are essential for the survival of humanity. But human values does not mean that if a thief enters my house and attempts to stab to death myself and my family members, I will just stand by and do nothing. Because frankly, there are certain individuals who believe in inhuman values, and these individuals have to be brought to book, and the international community must join together in bringing them to book. And when they do not do so, as Justin Trudeau, for example, to preserve and protect his chair, is ignoring the reality of Canada becoming a safe haven for terrorists, well then, you are harming the whole of humanity. And so don't talk of the rule of law or human rights. You are trampling on them. I think he spoke very well indeed.
But in fact, what I also found very interesting, Madhav Nalapat, is with regards to Minister Jaishankar also speaking about the East-West polarization, which has essentially become so very sharp. And what we have seen time and again, India essentially advocating that perhaps it is once again time to focus on diplomacy, dialogue, which happens to be the effective solution when it comes to combating various crises that we stare at.
Is the Mitra that India believes in the fellowship of all nations, but what is also the reality is that some countries do not believe in diplomacy and dialogue except as a camouflage for nefarious activities. And where these countries are concerned, other countries have to protect themselves. So, the point that is being made by him is, if I may say so, when we talk of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, it's a Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam of good people, of people who think good things should be done and they should do good things. And if you don't have that kind of feeling, if you have ill feeling towards other countries, and if your motivations and actions are evil and your words are honey, well then that is a double standard. And that is precisely what the Minister Jaishankar was alluding to. The clear double standard, for example, of Canada and Justin Trudeau. The double standard of allowing individuals who have been responsible for hundreds of the deaths of innocent people in India. And of course, may I say, Canadian citizens. Trudeau's father was the one, and I think it was on Republic that this was first mentioned, and by me, that it is Trudeau's father who basically resulted in the tragedy of the Kanishka bombing by refusing the Indian request to extradite Talvinder Parmar. And it is the junior Trudeau who is following in the footsteps of the father and accumulating innocent lives, dozens and dozens and hundreds of them, because of his carelessness and because of his basically contempt for doing the right thing, and his desire to just hang on to his chair no matter what. I'm sorry to say, Justin Trudeau's father had blood on his hands in the Kanishka episode, and Justin Trudeau today has blood on his hands. Every single one of those innocents who have been killed by the terrorists he is nourishing, including the terrorists that he celebrated, may I point out. He has blood on his hands, and it's a shame and a disgrace that the people of Canada, a wonderful people, a wonderful country, a country very friendly with India, and really a country that, all of us look up to, is now ruled by an individual who is a rank opportunist with no ethics and morality whatsoever.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Madhav Narapat, for joining us on this broadcast. Let me also quickly bring in Pathikrit Pen, who's joining us on this broadcast. Pathikrit, Minister Jaishankar also talks about that rule-based order, and interestingly he says that rule makers do not subjugate rule takers. A veiled attack when it comes to China, and also perhaps one would say countries, the G7 countries in particular. What do you really make of what Minister Jaishankar had to say?
Well, Shravan, I think it was a very nuanced and a focused speech, and he mentioned about many critical issues on which it is time for United Nations to bring about reforms. When he mentioned about rule of law, I think international rule-based order, I think of course there is definitely an angle of China in it. But at the same time, there are so many double standards on the part of the West as well. One thing that he mentioned about is, it's about, issues of terrorism and defining what terrorism is all about. Unfortunately, till date, the United Nations has failed to bring out with a definition of what terrorism stands for. And unfortunately, there has been this terminology of good terrorists and bad terrorists, which the West has cultivated for long to, have its, as per its own convenience. Secondly, when we talk about rule-based order and, respecting the sovereignty of countries, I think here also he mentioned something very interesting, that he stated that the global north or the West cannot have cherry picking on this issue. For example, when it comes to the issues in Ukraine, I think the angle was that in case of Ukraine, you call it an invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and you talk about genocide and you talk about trying the president of Russia. But at the same time, I think United Nations or the UNSC, most of the time, members of UNSC from the Western Hemisphere or Global North remain very silent on the issue of what happened in Yugoslavia, what happened in Syria, what happened in Iraq or Afghanistan, or what happened in Libya, or many other places, including Vietnam. So I think when you talk about issues of rule-based order, there has to be unanimity in terms of its application, and of course there has to be a unanimity, but at the same time we cannot have double standards. Unfortunately, most of the major members of the United Nations Security Council have had this, convenience of application wherever it suits them. And therefore, what he eventually stated in terms of reforms in the multilateral institutions like United Nations, including reforming the United Nations Security Council by taking cue from India as to how it is creating a more inclusive world by including African Union into G20. I think he is talking about how an important issue that is still pending in terms of reforms in the United Nations Security Council. Because unless UNS is reformed and more countries are included in it, like India, which is home to 1/6 of humanity, I think these issues of rule-based order eventually will never be settled, because many of the countries have only used it to suit their own convenience. And that is where I think a summit like G20 under the presidency of India became so very relevant, because many institutions like the United Nations over the last 75 years, unfortunately because of their reluctance to reform, are actually became decadent organizations. Shravan.
Well, thank you very much, Patrikrit, for joining us on this broadcast. Let me also bring in Mr. Pradeep Kapoor, former Secretary of the Ministry of External Affairs, joining us on this broadcast. Pradeep Kapoor, if I can take a question with you with regards to what Minister Jaishankar had to say, that few nations setting the agenda won't go unchallenged. When Minister Jaishankar makes that point, remember this is what he has said in the past too. One, the double standards of the West, the fact that Europe does not essentially also look at the problems that Global South witnesses, and they are perhaps concentrating only about problems plaguing Europe, the West in particular. And now, of course, when he says the few nations setting the agenda won't go unchallenged, essentially talking about how things have changed. The expansion of BRICS, the inclusion of African Union in the G20, all that essentially indicating that the balance of power perhaps changing over a period of time.
Thank you very much, Shravan. In my career, spanning over 3.5 decades in diplomacy in all the continents of the world, I have seen that happen very closely. And what the External Affairs Minister is saying is very legitimate, very valid. And it is just bringing a sense of balance into the whole discussion, into the whole narrative. Because if you have economic might, if you have military might, it also leads to political might and the capacity to set the narrative and set the agenda also. A very small example here. Pol Pot was the autocrat dictator who was responsible for the genocide of over 1/4 of the Cambodian population. Some say between 1/4 to 1/3 of the entire Cambodian population was massacred during his regime. Now, if there is such a person who's indulged in killing his own people to that extent, where almost 1/4 to 1/3 of the country's population has been killed by genocide, and after he's overthrown and he runs into the forests and jungles with his remnant forces, the regime which is ruling from the capital of Cambodia in Phnom Penh, though it is supported by outside forces from Vietnam and Russia, but it is the legitimate government.
Right.
In the United Nations, what happens, because the other countries are setting the narrative, particularly the Western countries, and they have no fondness for Vietnam because the US has just been defeated in Vietnam and had to evacuate in a very inglorious way. And the other allies of UN also are not fond of Vietnam or Russia. So they ensure that the Pol Pot regime representative continues to sit in the United Nations from 79 onwards till 98 for almost 20 years, 19 years, after Pol Pot has been thrown out of power. And he is one of the worst, such dictators responsible for one of the worst genocides in the world. Now, when I go to Cambodia as ambassador of India and I realize this and I see this, and only when Pol Pot dies in the forest a natural death, at that stage there are motions from a lot of countries that he has to be thrown out, his representative has to be thrown out, and the legitimate Cambodian government has to be represented in the United Nations. Then finally in 98 it happens. So there have been umpteen such instances in the past where anything you do, if you have the might, is right, whereas if you are weak, it is absolutely wrong. Like, Winston Churchill and Anthony Eden, when they were discussing about the Nuremberg trials, and all the German generals were being treated like criminals after having fought very valiantly for their country. But now they were, absolutely painted as very bad, evil criminals. So when Anthony Eden said, to Winston Churchill as to what is happening, why is this happening? Winston Churchill's response to Anthony Eden was, that you have never to be on the losing side. That is the moral of the story. So when you have that power, when you have that capacity...
Well, thank you very much. Right. Go ahead, Mr. Kapoor. Complete your statement and then we'll once again play out what Minister Jaishankar had to say.
The External Affairs Minister is saying in the United Nations, is proclaiming very clearly to the world that that era is no longer going to be acceptable. The economic power has already started shifting. There is now more of a balance between the three top economic powers of the world. In purchasing power parity terms, India is the third most powerful economic power in the world. In military terms also, India is one of the more important military powers in the top few in the world. So India now has a legitimate reason to expect its voice to be heard. It represents in a very, massive way the voice of the global south. I've seen that in my own life as a diplomat in Africa and Latin America and in other countries everywhere, Caribbean, etc. The respect that Indian diplomacy has and the Indian statements have. So now that time has come for it to be articulated very, very categorically, very clearly, and I'm glad that he is doing that on a world forum, on a world stage, at the United Nations General Assembly, where this will find a lot of echo, reverberation and resonance in the days and years to come. Because India not being on the Security Council, not having the right to vote and veto, and these are all very, very strange things in this day and age for anybody to witness. So how this has to be set right? And already some changes have happened. We have seen Ajay Banga of Indian origin, who is Indian diaspora, is now the World Bank chief. So more and more of that has to happen. And that is what he is saying very clearly, very categorically. And I'm sure it will continue being sort of accepted more globally. Thank you, Shravan. Back to you, Shravan.
Well, thank you very much, Pradeep Kapoor, for putting this into perspective. In fact, some of this has largely been discussed even during the G20. The very fact that it is essentially time for bringing in the much needed reforms when it comes to the United Nations, and also perhaps articulating the fact that it is delayed, but it is time that India essentially gets its position in the UNSC. Let's play out what Minister Jaishankar had to say a short while back while he was addressing the UNGA.
Mr. President, we must never again allow an injustice like vaccine apartheid to recur. Climate action, too, cannot continue to witness an evasion of historical responsibilities. The power of markets should not be utilized to steer food and energy from the needy to the wealthy. Nor must we countenance that political convenience determines responses to terrorism, extremism, and violence. Similarly, respect for territorial integrity and non-interference in internal affairs cannot be exercises in cherry-picking. When reality departs from the rhetoric, we must have the courage to call it out. Without genuine solidarity, there can never be real trust. This is very much the sentiment of the Global South.
Pabitra Sachdev, one aspect that we've been discussing all this while is, of course, the veiled attack that we've essentially seen in countries like Canada and Pakistan. But the other important aspect is how essentially India has positioned itself, starting from the fact demanding that it is high time that financial institutions go through the much needed reform. One. Second, with regards to redundancy of several institutions linked to the United Nations. These are the much needed reforms as changing times, the demands of the changing times. Setting the agenda is what Minister Jaishankar essentially says, that the roadmap ahead is only going to change, and more importantly, the agenda is no longer going to be set by those nations who've been part of the Charter.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, absolutely what you said. You see, there are two things happening or more. But one main thing is that this whole Canada-India spat, India has not allowed that to overshadow or cloud this particular statement of our foreign minister, right? There are oblique references in a bigger picture. What India has done has consolidated and further reinforced its outlook to the new world matrix. I call it a matrix, which is emerging right now under construction. And in that new world matrix under construction, which is right now with changing alignments and all, Minister Jaishankar has clearly put forth the Delhi Declaration, the G20 Delhi Declaration. So the point being that, and in the Delhi G20 Declaration, I think everything is perhaps more or less, encompassed in it. The world of today is entering a new era, a historic, complete new era. In this era, equations are being made, remade, real interests are being defined. India has introduced during the Delhi Declaration core big picture principles, which Minister Jaishankar, by repeating, emphasizing some of those core points at the UN forum, has clearly linked up in front of the entire UN, the world community, right? See, he mentioned, for example, about markets. We have said in the G20 also that the world or a nation is not a market. Policymakers or world leaders look at any country or the world as a market. Nations have much more than markets. Nations have societies, people, emotions, compassion, faith, etc., right? Minister has spoken about the North-South divides, which again in the G20, the reform of the institutions and all. So my point is that by the end of the G20, India had made a massive infusion into global thought of few big principles, of several big principles. One being core, live and let live. Coexistence, Vasudev Kutumbakam. The other being human-centric development. Right, and that again links that everything is not a market. Individuals are not to be seen as merely consumers. And the third was, which Minister Jaishankar also referred to in his speech right now, and Prime Minister Modi in the concluding last sentence of the G20 closing mentioned the word hope. Hope is the primary thing which keeps a human being going. So the dangers in the world today, climate change and all of that, etc., we are facing various challenges, yes, of poverty, north-south divide, east-west divides, all of that can be overcome with hope. So what I think Minister Jaishankar has done, he has reminded, reinforced, consolidated the inputs which India gave to the G20 community and taken it to the wider world community. I think that's the big picture, and therefore it is good that he did not, or we did not get into any references to Canada,
right.
And because then you're losing. I mean, you're letting some controversy overshadow your big picture of what you're bringing to the table.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Ravinder Sachdev, for putting this into perspective.
આ વિશેષ નારી શક્તિ ને વંદન એવા આ સંમેલનમાં ઉપસ્થિત છે ત્યારે ફરી એકવાર માં ભારતીના જય ઘોષ સાથે તેમને વધાવીએ. માતા કી.
Amity University is proud to present the Faculty Research Awards by Careers 360, acknowledging India's brightest minds in the field of academic research at Pradhan Mantri Sangrahalaya, New Delhi on the 6th of October. As part of Amity's commitment to further research and innovation in our country.
3, 2, 1, we are now called as Republic Kannada here in Karnataka.
Republic Kannada has officially launched.
So today we dedicate Republic Kannada to the people of Karnataka.
3, 2, 1. We are now called as Republic Kannada here in Karnataka.
Republic Kannada has officially launched.
Today we dedicate Republic Kannada to the people of Karnataka.
Three, 2, 1. We are now called as Republic Kannada here in Karnataka.
Republic Kannada has officially launched.
Today we dedicate Republic Kannada to the people of Karnataka.
Three, 2, 1. We are now called as Republic Kannada here in Karnataka.
Republic Kannada has officially launched.
Today we dedicate Republic Kannada to the people of Karnataka.
Three, 2, 1. We are now called as Republic Kannada here in Karnataka.
Republic Kannada has officially launched.
Today we dedicate Republic Kannada to the people of Karnataka.
Three, 2, 1. We are now called as Republic Kannada here in Karnataka.
Republic Kannada has officially launched.
Today we dedicate Republic Kannada to the people of Karnataka.
Three, 2, 1. We are now called as Republic Kannada here in Karnataka.
Republic Kannada has officially launched.
Today we dedicate Republic Kannada to the people of Karnataka.
Three, 2, 1. We are now called as Republic Kannada here in Karnataka.
Republic Kannada has officially launched.
we dedicate Republic Kannada to the people of Karnataka.
प्रचंड बहुमत के साथ लोकसभा में ये पारित हुआ और राष्ट्रपति के हस्ताक्षर के बाद ये अधिनियम बन जाएगा।
All right, viewers, visuals coming in of the Prime Minister in Ahmedabad, and those visuals coming in right now. He is in Gujarat, presiding over the event, marking the celebrations of 20 years of the vibrant Gujarat Global Summit at Science City. Let's go straight to Priyanka. Priyanka, the Prime Minister's roadshow in Ahmedabad, and we can see that he's getting a very enthusiastic and a very warm reception. Many people coming out in large numbers to catch a glimpse of the Prime Minister. What's happening?
बेहद महत्वपूर्ण बहस भी देखने को मिली, लेकिन राज्यसभा में सर्वसम्मति से, सर्वानुमति से इसे पारित किया गया। दोनों सदनों से इसे पारित किया गया और इतिहास रचा गया भारतीय लोकतंत्र में 75 वर्ष बाद, जब 33% आरक्षण सुनिश्चित किया गया लोकसभा, राज्यों की विधानसभाओं और दिल्ली की विधानसभा में। इस ऐतिहासिक विधेयक के पारित होने के बाद प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी गुजरात पहुंचे हैं। प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी का 2 दिन का गुजरात का दौरा है, जहां पर प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी अब इस कार्यक्रम में नारी शक्ति की वंदना करने के लिए पहुंचे हैं और मातृशक्ति उनका अभिनंदन कर रही है। और इसके अलावा 2 दिन के इस गुजरात दौरे पर प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी वाइब्रेंट गुजरात ग्लोबल समिट के 20 साल पूरा होने के उपलक्ष्य में आयोजित एक कार्यक्रम में हिस्सा लेंगे। साथ ही साथ बोडेली में 5,200 करोड़ रुपए से अधिक की परियोजनाओं को राष्ट्र को समर्पित करेंगे। अनेक परियोजनाओं का शिलान्यास करेंगे। पूरे गुजरात में स्कूल के बुनियादी ढांचे को बढ़ावा देने के लिए मिशन स्कूल ऑफ एक्सीलेंस कार्यक्रम के तहत 4,500 करोड़ रुपए से अधिक की परियोजनाओं को राष्ट्र को समर्पित करेंगे अगले 2 दिन के दौरे में। और इसके अलावा प्रधानमंत्री विद्या समीक्षा केंद्र 2.0 परियोजना की भी आधारशिला रखेंगे। इस समय प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी अहमदाबाद में है, जहां पर बड़ी संख्या में, हजारों की संख्या में मातृशक्ति, नारी शक्ति अभिनंदन कर रही है प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी का।
मां भारती ना साचा सपूत, आदि शक्ति ना परम आराधक અને ગુજરાતની ધરતીના પનોતા પુત્ર માનનીય વડાપ્રધાન શ્રી નરેન્દ્રભાઈ મોદી, આવો માં ભારતીના જયઘોષ સાથે તેઓને વધાવીએ। બોલો ભારત માતા की, भारत माता की, वंदे वंदे। खूब 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 आभार છે આજના આ ક્ષણે અને ખૂબ ખૂબ સ્વાગત છે માનનીય વડાપ્રધાન શ્રી નરેન્દ્રભાઈ મોદીનું। समस्त विश्वनी साथे 125 करोड़ भारतीयोना हृदयस्थ एवा माननीय वडाप्रधान श्रीનું આગમન થઈ ચૂક્યું છે, તેઓ પધારી ચૂક્યા છે। સાથે સાથે જ સરહદે સ્વાગત કરીએ ગુજરાત રાજ્યના માનનીય મુખ્યમંત્રી શ્રી ભૂપેન્દ્રભાઈ પટેલ સાહેબ, સરહદે સ્વાગત કરીએ।